Picture a world connected not by fiber optics, but by creaking wooden ships heavy with copper and tin. It is 1250 BCE, the height of the Late Bronze Age. A golden international age stretches from the Green Nile Delta to the rocky shores of Greece and the Anatolian Plateau. The great kings of Egypt, the Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greece, and the Assyrians call each other brother. They exchange lavish gifts: gold from Nubia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, ivory from Africa, and fine pottery from Cyprus. Their scribes write to each other on clay tablets in a shared diplomatic language, Akkadian, debating trade tariffs, arranging royal marriages, and complaining about delayed shipments of bronze weaponry. This isn't a world of isolated kingdoms. It is a globalized economy built on a single, critical resource: bronze. To make it, you need copper from Cyprus and, crucially, tin from distant, almost mythical mines in Afghanistan. The entire military and agricultural might of these empires, their chariots, their swords, their plowshares, depends on this complex supply chain. Palaces at Mycenae, Hattusa, and Thebes are not just royal homes. They are massive bureaucratic centers, warehouses of wealth, and command posts for a system so intricate and interconnected that no single ruler truly understands its fragility. They believe their world is eternal, that the gods have blessed their system, and that the great kings will rule forever. They are about to learn that complex systems have complex breaking points. Before the invaders, before the burning cities, came a silent, invisible enemy. For decades, the climate had been changing. The rains that fed the Nile, watered the Hittite grain fields, and nourished the Greek olive groves became less reliable. Tree ring data and ancient pollen analysis tell us a story the Bronze Age kings couldn't read. A prolonged period of severe drought gripped the eastern Mediterranean. At first, it was a nuisance. The harvests were slightly smaller. The great palaces, with their massive grain stores, could absorb the shock. Letters between kings begin to mention shortages, requests for emergency grain shipments. The Hittite queen writes to the Egyptian pharaoh, "I have no grain in my lands," a desperate plea disguised in diplomatic language. The famine wasn't an event. It was a slow, tightening fist. It drove hungry pastoralists from the dry hinterlands toward the fertile coasts. It created waves of internal refugees, straining the resources of the great cities. It turned farmers into desperate wanderers. The complex system began to fray at the edges. The kings, secure in their stone fortresses, saw the unrest as a policing problem, not a sign of systemic collapse. They sent their bronze-clad soldiers to quell riots, unaware that the real enemy was in the sky above and the barren soil beneath their feet. The foundation of their world was cracking, but they were too busy polishing the golden statues on the mantelpiece to notice. From the chaos of famine and displacement, a new force emerged. Egyptian records call them the Sea Peoples, a confederation of seaborne raiders from across the Mediterranean. But who were they? They were not a single nation. Their names are a roll call of the dispossessed: Peleset, Denyen, Shardana, Checker. Some may have been Mycenaean Greeks whose kingdoms had already collapsed, now turned pirate. Others were Anatolians fleeing the Hittite collapse, or Libyans driven by desertification. They are the human consequence of the climate catastrophe. Imagine a fleet not of organized military ships, but of commandeered merchant vessels, fishing boats, and crude warships, their decks crowded with entire families, warriors with strange feathered helmets, women, children, and all their worldly possessions. They were not just a raiding party. They were a migratory swarm, a civilization on the water, searching for a new home and willing to burn the world to find one. For the settled empires, they were an unimaginable horror. They didn't follow the rules of war. They didn't want tribute. They wanted land. They didn't capture cities. They annihilated them, leaving nothing but ash. They were a symptom of the world's sickness, a human tsunami born from the drought and hunger that were now consuming the great civilizations from within. Their arrival on the coasts of Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant marked the moment the crisis turned from a slow decline into a violent, unstoppable conflagration. On the coast of modern-day Syria lay the jewel of the Levant, the port city of Ugarit. It was a cosmopolitan hub of trade, a city of scribes, merchants, and diplomats, where a dozen languages were spoken in the markets. And it is from Ugarit that we have a real-time account of the end. In the city's final days, the king, Amurapi, received a desperate message from the king of Cyprus, warning of enemy ships. Amurapi wrote a frantic reply, a message that would be found by archaeologists 3,000 years later, still baking in the kiln where it was being fired when the city fell. "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came," he wrote. "My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. The enemy is advancing against us, and I have no ships." His army was far away, fighting with the Hittites. His navy was on patrol off the coast of Lycia. Ugarit was defenseless. Imagine the terror in that palace. The scribe frantically etching the king's words into clay, the smell of smoke already drifting in from the harbor, the screams from the street growing louder. This tablet is the Bronze Age equivalent of a final, desperate distress call from a sinking ship. Ugarit was burned to the ground so violently that the fire baked the clay tablets, preserving them for eternity. The city was never resettled. Its destruction was absolute, a stark warning of what was to come for everyone else. For 500 years, the Hittite Empire had been one of the world's superpowers. A militaristic and bureaucratic giant ruling from their impregnable mountain capital of Hattusa, they were the equals of Egypt. They had defeated Ramesses the Great at the Battle of Kadesh and controlled the vital metal resources of Anatolia. And then, in the space of a single generation, they vanished. Completely. The fall of the Hittite Empire is one of the most profound disappearances in history. The capital, Hattusa, a city of massive stone walls and imposing temples, was violently sacked and burned. But this was more than the fall of a city. The entire state apparatus disintegrated. The complex bureaucracy, the scribal schools, the imperial religion, even their language and writing system, all ceased to exist. It was as if a modern superpower was not just defeated, but utterly erased from memory, its language forgotten, its cities abandoned to the wind. For centuries, the Hittites were known only through scattered mentions in the Bible, thought by many scholars to be a myth. Their rediscovery in the early 20th century was a shock. What could cause such a total and final collapse? It was the perfect storm. The drought had shattered their agricultural base. Internal rebellions had weakened the state, and the arrival of invaders, perhaps the Sea Peoples, perhaps another group called the Kaskans, delivered the final, fatal blow. An entire civilization, a pillar of the Bronze Age world, was gone. This was the Greece of legend, the age of Agamemnon, Achilles, and Odysseus. The Mycenaeans were warriors, traders, and builders of colossal fortresses at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. Their palaces were centers of a highly organized, top-down society where scribes using a script called linear tracked every jar of olive oil and every bronze spearhead in the kingdom. Their wealth was legendary, their tombs filled with golden death masks and exquisite artifacts. Then their world also came to a fiery end. Within a few decades, every single Mycenaean palace was violently destroyed and abandoned. The destruction was systematic. Pylos, the palace of the wise King Nestor, was burned so intensely that its clay tablets were fired hard, preserving the kingdom's last frantic records. They speak of watchers guarding the coast and of emergency bronze requisitions to make more weapons, clear evidence of a desperate, last-minute defense against an unknown enemy. After the palaces fell, the darkness was absolute. The intricate linear script was forgotten. The complex political structure dissolved. The population plummeted by as much as 75%. Greece entered a true dark age that would last for 400 years. The art of building in stone was lost. Long-distance trade ceased. People lived in small, impoverished villages. Their world shrunk to the next valley over. The heroic age of gods and warriors was over, replaced by a struggle for mere survival. As the world burned around it, one great power remained: Egypt. Under Pharaoh Ramesses III, Egypt faced the full force of the Sea People's migration. Temple inscriptions at Medinet Habu provide a vivid, propagandistic account of the invasion. They came by land and sea, a coalition of peoples whose hearts and souls were finished. Ramesses met them in two massive, brutal battles. On the coast, the Egyptian navy trapped the Sea People's fleet in the Nile Delta, turning the water red with blood. A net was prepared for them. The inscription boasts, showing Egyptian archers raining down arrows on the chaotic enemy fleet. On land, the Egyptian army and their chariots halted the invaders' massive land migration. Egypt won. Ramesses III saved his country from total destruction, and for this he was hailed as a god-king, the savior of civilization. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The cost was astronomical. The wars drained the treasury, which was already suffering from the loss of all its trading partners. The vast empire in the Levant was gone forever. The victory didn't restore the old world. It merely allowed Egypt to survive in a poorer, more dangerous, and more isolated one. Ramesses III had won the battle but lost the Bronze Age. His reign marks not a new beginning, but the start of Egypt's long, slow decline. He was the last great pharaoh of the new kingdom, the lonely king of a broken world. So what truly killed the Bronze Age? It wasn't one thing. It was everything all at once. Modern historians call it a systems collapse. Think of it like a body with multiple organ failures. The drought was the chronic illness, weakening the entire system for decades. This led to famine, which caused massive social unrest and created waves of desperate migrants. The Sea Peoples. The arrival of these raiders was the acute trauma, a violent shock to an already sick patient. But the real problem was the interconnectedness that had once been the system's greatest strength. The fall of Mycenaean Greece disrupted trade routes. The collapse of the Hittites cut off the supply of metals. Without tin from the east and copper from Cyprus, you couldn't make bronze. And a Bronze Age civilization without bronze is like our world without oil or electricity. It grinds to a halt. Armies couldn't be equipped. Tools couldn't be made. The entire economic and military structure imploded. It was a domino effect on a global scale. Each fallen kingdom made it harder for the others to survive. Trade routes broke, knowledge was lost, and complex societies could no longer support their own weight. They had built a world so specialized and interdependent that when one major pillar fell, the entire roof came crashing down. They were the first civilization to experience the dark side of globalization. Out of the ashes of the Bronze Age, a new world was slowly, painfully born. For centuries, life was poorer, more violent, and more local. The great international empires were gone, replaced by a patchwork of small city-states and tribal kingdoms. The art of writing was lost in many places, and the population was a fraction of what it had been. But the collapse, for all its horror, was also a reset. It broke the rigid, top-down control of the palace economies. In the power vacuum, new peoples and new ideas could flourish. The Philistines, likely descendants of the Peleset Sea Peoples, settled on the coast of Canaan. The Israelites established a kingdom in the hills. The Arameans and Phoenicians rose to prominence. And a new technology emerged, one not dependent on fragile, long-distance trade routes. Iron. Iron ore is common, found almost everywhere, unlike the rare tin needed for bronze. At first, iron was a poor substitute, brittle and difficult to work. But as blacksmiths in the long, dark centuries perfected their craft, they created steel. This new metal was cheaper, stronger, and more democratic. No longer did a king need to control international sea lanes to equip an army. A local chieftain with a good blacksmith could be just as powerful. The Iron Age had begun, forged in the fires that had consumed the world of bronze. Why does this ancient apocalypse, this forgotten collapse of a world 3,000 years ago, feel so terrifyingly relevant today? Because the story of the Bronze Age collapse is a warning that echoes across the millennia. We, too, live in a complex, globalized world, dependent on intricate supply chains for everything from our smartphones to our food. We, too, face a changing climate whose full consequences we cannot yet predict. We, too, see social unrest and mass migrations driven by desperation and environmental pressure. The Bronze Age kings believed they were masters of their universe. They had the strongest armies, the greatest wealth, the most advanced technology of their time. They could not imagine a world without them. Their clay tablets, filled with boastful accounts of their power right up until the very end, are a testament to their blindness. Their story teaches us that no civilization is too big to fail. It shows us how quickly stability can unravel into chaos when multiple crises, environmental, economic, and political, converge at once. The ruins of Hattusa, Mycenae, and Ugarit are not just tourist attractions. They are monuments to a forgotten apocalypse, a sobering reminder that the systems that sustain us are more fragile than we think. They whisper a timeless question from the dust. Are we listening?